It's official. This is the craziest thing I have driven all year. This is a 2025 Mercedes-AMG GLC 63 SE Performance. Quite a mouthful, designed to compete with the BMW X3 M and the Alfa Stelvio Quadrifoglio, if that Alfa still existed at any rate, with, wait for it, a 671 horsepower drivetrain system based around a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo. Yep, 2 liters, 4 cylinders. You might be thinking to yourself, how does that work? Well, don't worry, we'll get there. But first, the GLC itself. This generation launched for the 2023 model year, and up until now, it's been available with only one AMG trim level, the GLC 43. The 43 and the 63, they actually look pretty similar up front. We get an AMG badge there, the blacked out grille, big reflector LED headlights. These are some of the best in this segment, with the relatively discreet DRL right there. There's a little bit less cooling than you might imagine in the GLC 63. Of course, we have the big grille here and lots of cooling going on there, but on the side, these are not used for extra intercooler cooling or anything like that. Instead, they're for brake cooling and to help direct air around the front wheel wells. Before everybody gets fired up in the comment section for this being a little bit dirty, it has been raining for 7 days non-stop, and things are getting a little muddy and squishy out here in the forest. We also had our first ever recorded F1 tornado about 4 miles that way. How fun is that? Back to the GLC though, because it's supposed to start raining any moment. At 187 inches long, this is a little bit longer than previous generations, and most of that length goes to the passenger compartment on the inside. We still have a relatively long hood and of course the classic rear-wheel drive proportions you'd expect because the GLC is still based around a rear-wheel drive platform. This is almost exactly the same length as the 2025 BMW X3 M. Quite logical because in America, that is its only true competitor. The Stelvio Quadrifoglio, that's gone. There's no such thing as an SQ5 here. And the Porsche Macan, it doesn't produce anywhere near the horsepower figures or performance levels we find in this model. Although, logically, you could cross-shop a lot of those Macan options against the GLC 43. As we see in a lot of performance SUVs, we have a staggered wheel and tire setup, 295 width tires in the back, 265s in front, and these are the optional 21-inch wheels. The Mercedes design team has definitely been gravitating towards more rounded shapes, more organic and flowing lines than harsh creases, and that continues with the GLC 63. You'll notice we still have sort of a bell shape here because we have some pretty wide tires in the back, but it's not a harsh crinkled line like we find in some. Down here we have 4 exhaust tips, yep, just 1 per cylinder. GLC 63 S badging there, and it's a little bit difficult to tell on camera, but these are amber turn signals in the back. What I love about Mercedes lighting lately is that this entire module is, however, tinted red. So when the turn signals are off, the entire module looks red, so it's a bit more cohesive design-wise, but then when the turn signal turns on, you'll notice it actually is amber. It's a lot easier for people to tell exactly what you're doing than simply flashing a brake light like we see in so many. It's now time to go under the hood where the magic happens, and trust me, we'll talk about that cord I was tripping over just a moment ago. For 2025, every GLC in North America is going to be powered by a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo engine and some form of hybrid system. You get 255 horsepower in the base model, then 313 horsepower, then 416 horsepower, then 671 horsepower. But how we get to those horsepower totals, we need to talk about that. Again, the base model, mild hybrid. Next step up from there is a plug-in hybrid that I'm actually really intrigued to drive. Hopefully we'll get our hands on that soon because that gives you 313 horsepower and a whopping 54 miles of all-electric range, really stretching out those gas station stops on the average daily commute. If you want more performance, 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds, you want the entry-level AMG, the 43, that gives you 416 horsepower, thanks to a mild hybrid system and one of the most powerful 4-cylinder engines in the world. If you want the most powerful 4-cylinder engine in the world, well, you want this one, 469 horsepower from just the 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo all on its own. It is mated to a 9-speed automatic transmission and all-wheel drive. Now, how do we get from 469 to 671? We get there thanks to a 201 horsepower motor on the rear axle connected to a separate 2-speed transmission. Yes, this not only has an engine, several motors, it has 2 transmissions, a 9-speed up front and a 2-speed in the back. You might be thinking, why would you want to do that? Well, remember that electric motors are kind of like engines, only with broader power and torque curves. They don't produce peak horsepower and peak torque at the same RPM, and if you really want to be most efficient and get the most performance out of a motor, you kind of need a stepped automatic transmission. EVs have dabbled with this in the past to various amounts of success, but thanks to the motor here being lower output than a 671 horsepower electric motor, they can stick a 2-speed on the back. What's intriguing about this AMG hybrid system is that even though we have a motor on the back, it still has a mechanical all-wheel drive system, and it functions basically the same as any other AMG all-wheel drive setup. So it can send all the power to the rear if it wanted to by disconnecting the clutch to the front axle, or it can actually send power from that electric motor to the front axle mechanically via that all-wheel drive system even when it's in the EV mode. That's all possible thanks to a high-output 6.1 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack, specifically designed for the power output and fast charging profiles required for a vehicle like this to operate. So if you're out on a track and you need 671 horsepower, it's going to pull that out of the battery pack. But the moment you stop doing that, it's going to start charging that battery very rapidly thanks to the motor generator unit up front and, of course, the motor in the back as well. That battery is there for the performance, not necessarily for the electric range, because this gets 53 miles fewer electric range miles than the regular plug-in hybrid version of the GLC. And if math is not your strong suit, let me just highlight, that means, according to the EPA, this is a plug-in hybrid with 1 mile of all-electric range. There are a few other things you should probably be aware of. Curb weight is one of them. This tips the scales at 5,126 pounds, thanks to the rear electric motor, the battery pack, and the rear wheel steering mechanism as well. That does, however, move 51% of the weight to the rear axle, which is definitely different than the previous generation GLC 63, which had 55% of its weight up front. Much heavier V8 engine on the front axle. Now, unfortunately, due to the design of the engine, perhaps the tire size up front, 265 width, the front wheels definitely don't turn as tight as the rest of the GLC lineup, and that's why this has a pretty big turning circle, 42.3 feet versus 38.7 feet in the rest of the GLC lineup, and that is despite the rear wheel steering. Let's take a deeper dive under the hood so you can understand exactly how this new drivetrain works. This engine was hand-assembled by Dexter Wheeler. That's definitely an AMG thing, the hand assembly of the engines. I have moved the engine cover to the side a little bit so you can better see what's going on. It's difficult to remove without removing the strut tower brace, so I didn't want to do that for this video. Over here you can see the pretty large turbocharger, especially given the displacement of this engine at 2 liters. That is possible without the turbo lag that you would normally associate with a big compressor because of the electric motor that's over here on this side. This is not like earlier attempts at turbocharging and supercharging an engine where you had to have valves and baffles and clutches, etc. Instead, we have an electric motor that simply spins up the shaft on the same turbo that the exhaust gases are also powering. That's made possible by the high voltage connections down there below. And that's of course all possible again because of the high voltage nature of this hybrid system. Then we have 2 huge intercoolers. So you can see it actually sends the air down through that intercooler and then across the bottom and then up through this intercooler and then off to the intake side of that 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. Then there is a motor generator unit attached to the engine itself, kind of down there in the engine bay. That's what enables the engine to turn on and off very rapidly, and it can also generate power whenever needed. I've started it up so you can see what the engine sounds like while it's idling. It definitely is a little rougher than some 4-cylinder engines, but keep in mind the power output profile. On the other hand, as long as the active exhaust valves are closed, it's fairly civilized out back. Since this is a frequently asked question, I'll address it now. No, you don't have to plug it in to get all 671 horsepower, and I suspect most GLC 63 owners are probably never going to plug their SUV in. Doesn't really seem worth it if I'm honest. Now, there are some penalties for the plug-in hybrid system. The battery pack and the rear motor unit occupy some portion of the rear cargo area. You get about 5 cubic feet less space than you get in the regular GLC, so 16.6 cubic feet total, although in typical German fashion, that is all basically below the roller-style cargo cover because they don't rate all the way to the ceiling like some car companies do. Some of the cargo capacity is lost because the load floor gets a little bit higher, and then some is lost because under the floor we don't have really any usable storage space. There is the tiniest little slot here where I guess you could stick your charge plug. This is actually bolted down to the body, so we can't take that off easily. And then over here we have the Can-A-Fix-A-Flat. On that side we have the tire inflator. This GLC comes with a dual voltage charge cord, although oddly enough, when it's in the bag, it's actually a little bit too big to fit there in the slot. I'm 6 feet tall, about 180 pounds. If you're much larger than I am, I would recommend not getting these optional performance seats. They are a little bit tight across the shoulder blade area, but as far as the thigh bolsters and the side bolsters, those feel just about right for my size. We have a powered tilt telescopic steering column and the same range of motion for the passenger seat as well. We have Mercedes' very programmable 4-way adjustable lumbar support. I'll show you that in the screen in a bit. Due to the design of the performance seats, you have a little bit less room in the back than you get in most GLC models. But every GLC is going to be a little bit tight if you want to put rear-facing child seats behind someone about 6 feet tall, which again is my height. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks, and as you can see, you actually can't really sit comfortably behind it, and the footwell area gets a little bit restricted. There's also a decent hump in the middle because, again, still a rear-wheel drive based vehicle with the drive shaft that goes to the back. We have a padded armrest in the middle with cup holders and a little pencil storage area there. Sorry, gotta actually click this right to get the cup holders out. There we go. You sort of have to do a double tap to actually get the cup holders out. We also have air vents there in the center console. Of course, lots of ambient lighting and lots of stitched leather going on the doors and the seat backs as well. Inside and out, this model has about $30,000 in options on it, so certainly keep that in mind as we look around the interior. Up here you'll see one of the ambient lighting strips. I have to say that Mercedes has one of the best ambient lighting games in town because of not just where they put the ambient lighting strips, but also some of the attention to detail and how configurable the system is. We'll take a look at that in a moment, but here you can see we have not only ambient lighting reflecting off of this portion of the upper panel here, but also some texture inside to give it a bit of extra drama. Slide to the side, sun visors, pretty big panoramic roof that extends to just back there by the rear passengers' heads. More ambient lighting going on those rear doors. The rear doors and the front doors have basically the same sort of quality going on. We have the AMG logo embossed in that fixed in-place head restraint. We also have height adjustable shoulder belts. And again, these are the optional seats. So we have the AMG logo there, and then we have these red accents and yes, actually kind of holes through the seat back. So you can actually kind of poke someone there if you were in the back. Kind of fun, I guess, for the kids to do. Over here we have inflatable side bolsters, pretty aggressive seat bottom bolsters as well. Larger drivers and front passengers might have some trouble finding a comfortable position rather, in those seats. Lots of stitch detail going on the front doors, leather wrap there, etc. We do find some hard plastics, for instance, down there around that complete bottom part of the door. More ambient lighting yet again. Moving over to the dashboard, of course, carbon fiber, because what performance vehicle would be complete without that? More ambient lighting yet again, and even ambient lighting inside the air vents. You can see kind of a sort of a turbine style air vent there. Lots of ambient lighting going around in those areas. Down here, bin style glove compartment. I was able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. And speaking of tablet computers, we have kind of one grafted into the dashboard here. This is the latest Mercedes M-Bux system. Highly configurable with, of course, lots of integrated apps like the AMG Performance app, where you can see exactly where your power is going, how much power each of these things is delivering, how much torque I should say there, the temperature of everything, so you can see that the battery pack is still technically warming up, as is the transmission. We also have that seat configurability I promised to show you earlier. So if we go here into the comfort section, sorry, my fingers are dry, so it's not understanding where I am. We have not only the seat kinetics system, this is not massage, it just moves the seat position around, but we have this lumbar support mechanism, which we've seen in Mercedes vehicles for a while. It really gives you a lot of control of exactly where that bulge in the seat is going to be. Down below, touch controls for the climate control system, some direct access buttons to those AMG pages, for instance, your drive modes there, 360-degree cameras, your charge settings, charge program, for instance there. More vehicle direct settings, Parktronic, lead and keep assist, etc. Fingerprint sensor right there, volume slider. I don't care for volume sliders that are touch controls. I do have to admit that. It's my only complaint in that bank. Then down here we have my other complaint, which is lots of shiny black plastic that is definitely going to get scratched. In here we have two big cup holders, USB-C inputs. You, of course, can connect your phone wired or wireless, your choice. We have the Qi wireless charging mat down there as well. And this cup holder spins out like that. So you can use that for extra storage, but this one does not. I suppose that makes your phone easier to retrieve. We then have a split center armrest that opens to reveal a relatively small storage cubby. Keep in mind, of course, that there is a drive shaft under there. So you can remove that little divider, but there's not a lot of extra room going on. Back on the dashboard, we have lots of stitched leather going on there. No head-up display, but we do have a large full-color LCD instrument cluster. And of course, this has the same level of configurability that we've seen in other Mercedes models, where you can choose between a number of different designs using the controls on the steering wheel. And that design is going to affect the center display's theme a little bit as well. We have the latest Mercedes steering wheel design with the touch controllers for that screen over here on that side, and a touch controller for the central LCD on the right side of the steering wheel. We also have some touch controls for the volume up down, phone buttons, favorite button, etc. Adaptive cruise control over here, big paddle shifters on the back that move with the steering wheel. Then we have the configurable AMG buttons and dials down here. This is a cool thing that we've seen from AMG for a while. Here's what's going on. You press the front, this is a touch screen here, and that changes what this little toggle behind does. So for instance, that's the active exhaust at the moment, but I can make it anything I want. I can make that the suspension, I can change that one to manual drive mode, AMG dynamics, etc. Very configurable system. And then over here we have the drive mode selector. This also adjusts the level of recuperation, which is what they're calling throttle liftoff brake regen. So you dial around for your drive modes, and then you can press in there for that recoup. Now, before we get this out on the road, we should talk a little bit more about the drive modes, because we have a bunch of ones to choose from. We have battery hold that's going to maintain the charge in the battery. We have an electric operation mode, kind of silly since we don't really have much electric range. We then have the typical comfort mode, Sport, Sport Plus, and Race. These are all going to change the way that the system treats the battery, and that is the critical thing we need to talk about. The more aggressive the drive mode, the higher the state of charge that the system is going to try and maintain in the battery. And when we're in the race mode, it really wants that battery to be almost completely full, because that's going to give you 671 horsepower for the most amount of time. And you'll notice if you're out on the road, it's going to favor lower gear ratios, of course, in the transmission. And if we go back to this screen here, it's also going to spend a lot more time charging the battery, especially in steady state travel. Out on the road, this is shockingly quick. And of course, you have those ridiculous burbles and cracks and pops from the exhaust system in the back. 0 to 60 in this model, 3.34 seconds. That is definitely very, very swift. About the same performance that we found out of the V8, and I would say the experience, in some ways it's better, depending on exactly how you feel about that V8 burble, because unlike many 4-cylinder turbo replacements for bigger displacement engines, this does not have the turbo lag that you might assume it would, thanks to the electric supercharger under the hood, and of course that stonking electric motor in the back. We also have a weight balance that is very different. The road actually is kind of slick outside right now, so I'm not going to push this to its limit, but you can feel that this has a nimbleness that you might not expect with the curb weight of 5,100 pounds. And some of that definitely has to do with the new curb weight balance, or I should say weight balance here, because the previous model was definitely front heavy. This is not. It sounds a bit more like a GLA, if I'm honest, out on the road. Not like a GLC 63 from years ago, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It has a sports personality all to its own. Now, the one area where it cannot defeat physics is in the stopping distance. Keep in mind that the only time we were able to test was on road surfaces that were a little bit moist this morning and about 43 degrees Fahrenheit. So probably has something to do with it, but it took 118 feet for this to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. That is on the long side for the performance segment, but as times change and as we start to see fewer bigger displacement engines and more hybrids and plug-in hybrids on the performance side of things, it's probably going to become very normal. But again, that does not mean that you have to give up performance, because this is just so much fun. And the handling is still fantastic, don't get me wrong. The rear wheel steering makes it feel almost psychic. It doesn't have a super aggressive rear wheel steer like we find a Cybertruck or something like that. It's just enough to make you feel like something magical is happening back there on a winding road like this. It's so engaging that In a way, it's almost video game-like how neatly it cuts every single corner. I'm gonna have to give handling an A, because we all know that the curb weight means that grip levels could be better. If you could have this same level of grip, the same level of magic in the back, and still be 1,000 pounds lighter, you'd be in a better place. But as it is, for a 21st century vehicle, this is definitely fantastic. The standard adaptive suspension system definitely gets firm in the Sport Plus mode. You'll really feel those speed bumps, every imperfection out on this gravel road here. But interestingly, if I move this configurable knob, another speed bump there. If I move this configurable knob over to comfort mode, things comfort down quite considerably. It's still not going to be as smooth as the rest of the GLC lineup, but this is certainly going to be daily driver livable. So if you're worried about something like this being a bit too hardcore, keep in mind that Mercedes still needed to damp over 5,100 pounds of curb weight. So still actually pretty darn comfortable, even on those bigger bumps. In the cabin noise testing department, well, 71 decibels is what we got at 50 miles an hour. With the exhaust in its quiet mode, of course. That's pretty normal given the tire size that we find on this vehicle, but actually a little bit quieter than I'd honestly expected it to be. Fuel economy, we need to dive into that in greater detail while we talk about how this plug-in hybrid system is working right now. This should get about 20% better fuel economy than really any of the competition, or the previous generation 63. This is EPA rated for 20 miles per gallon combined. That may not sound impressive, except if you take a look at the competition, where the previous versions of the GLC 63 were 14 to 15 miles per gallon or so, somewhere in that range according to the EPA. Some of the competition might get up there according to the EPA to around 17 miles per gallon. The Stelvio was kind of efficient in quadrifolio form, but in real world driving, you were still looking at 14 to 15 miles per gallon. In this, you're really not, and that's thanks to the plug-in hybrid system design. Now, again, what's interesting about this plug-in hybrid system is climbing this hill, driving aggressively, I'm still gaining charge because I'm in the race mode. And the race mode means that this is going to be the most aggressive at trying to fill that battery pack completely up. Going uphill, going downhill, it doesn't care. It's going to charge the battery, because a charged battery is the only way you're going to get 670 horsepower out of this system. Of course, it's now started raining in earnest, so I'm going to be dialing those drive modes back. And this is where I will say I appreciate the fact that you can be in some of the more aggressive engine and transmission modes while having the suspension in comfort mode, the exhaust in quiet mode, and all the electronic nannies on, because I'm certainly not going to be using all those ponies on these wet road surfaces right now. Instead, I'm going to move this over to the all-electric mode, where we still have all-wheel drive. Definitely a big difference between the design of this hybrid system and the one that we find, for instance, in the Volvo XC60. Not a direct competitor to this at all, but a solid selling plug-in hybrid in the luxury segment. When that one's in electric-only operation, it's rear-wheel drive only. It cannot send power to the front axle. It has to start the engine for that. This does not, and this actually has a pretty powerful motor in the back, so you can get on the highway, you can commute to work, you can climb hills like this, you can even drive in a surprisingly spirited fashion in electric-only operation. For not too long, to be honest. Now, in our testing, this does get more than 1 mile of all-electric range. It's actually closer to around 7, maybe 8 miles of all-electric range. I might plug it in if I was really inclined. I suspect a lot of people aren't. Again, we'll talk about that in just a bit. But if you are wondering, no, this isn't somehow so wicked and efficient in the electric-only operation that it truly gets just 1 mile of electric range. The 1 mile of electric range seems to have more to do with the way that the EPA test cycle works and how much battery Mercedes actually lets you access before it decides it needs to start recharging. We've been climbing this hill here for about 2 miles, and I have consumed about 4 miles of indicated all-electric range. We're still going in electric-only operation. So clearly, real world, it's definitely more than 1 mile. As you might imagine, supersized fun comes with a supersized price tag. This model theoretically started at $86,000 plus destination and the options that you see on this model, and this one rings in at $115,415. Yep, my eyes popped out of my head also. The BMW X3 M though, about the same price tag if I'm honest, and the Porsche Macan GTS, about the same price tag as well. even though the performance numbers are reversed. It's not 3.4 seconds 0 to 60, it's 4.3 seconds 0 to 60 because it has 434 horsepower. This one has nearly 700 horsepower. But we should probably talk more about that plug-in system. In the luxury segment, we've really seen a rise in the popularity of plug-in hybrid systems. Now, some of this is logically due to European legislation, because the only way to have a bonkers GLC like this in the future in Europe is to either have a plug-in hybrid at the moment or have a fully electric model. And some manufacturers are actually ditching this kind of model and going straight to electrification. If you want bonkers levels of performance in your Macan, you're going to be getting an electric one. If you want, 435 horsepower to compete with the mid-level version of this, that would be the other versions of the Macan at the moment. But plug-in hybrids like this are also controversial because this is not like the other GLC where you get actually quite a lot of electric range, over 50 miles of electric range. If you actually bother to plug this in, it's not going to take long to charge it. Even on a regular household outlet, it's only going to take like 4 to 5 hours to charge because you're only going to get 1 to 2 miles of all electric range. I suspect most owners will not even worry that there is a door there. They'll simply be filling it with gas on the other side. So for some people, that may seem like a waste, but here's my thought on this. In order to get this level of performance out of a hybrid, yes, we'll just call it a hybrid, you need a big battery pack. Because in order to give you 201 horsepower at a moment's notice for a long duration of time and really give you that level of track performance that AMG shoppers expect out of their vehicle, you have to have a battery at least this big. And then if you have a battery at least this big, you might as well stick a charge door on it. I mean, why not? It doesn't really cost too much more to have the door and the charger circuitry on board. Then if you wanted to, you could get that tiny, tiny bump in electric range. But even I would say I would probably never bother to plug it in on my own. Instead, I would be more interested in the reality that this does get 20% or more better fuel economy than the V8 competition. 20 miles per gallon may not sound great when you compare it against, I don't know, pretty much every other compact SUV in this segment, except if that compact SUV goes 0 to 60 around 4 seconds. This is faster than 4 seconds. If we're talking about that group of competitors, then in reality, 14 to 15 miles per gallon is more the real world norm. And in this, your real world norm is going to be 19 to 20 miles per gallon. If you treat it really gently, maybe 21. If you plug it in every night and you have a really short commute, maybe you could get up there to 25 miles per gallon. And if you live in a hilly area like I do, you actually might see a tiny extra bump in fuel efficiency because it can regenerate all the way down the hill. The bottom line here is the increased complexity, the extra systems on board, is that worth the extra bump in terms of performance? Now, performance again, gotta define this because it's not just about the 0 to 60, it's about the immediacy of the power delivery. Because yes, the previous version unquestionably sounded better, and it would still go 0 to 60 in about 3.4 seconds. But it didn't have the immediacy of that power delivery that, oddly enough, we find in a much smaller engine, and it's all thanks to that electric battery pack and motor in the back. If you just had the regular twin-turbo V8, the 4-liter one from Mercedes, and you floored it to pass someone, yeah, there was a lot of power, but there was also a little bit more hesitation, just a little bit more lag, because it didn't have the big torquey electric motor in the back. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section. And what do you think is going to get this system next? I have to admit, I would love to see something like this in a wide variety of Mercedes products. If there was a system that could replace certainly twin turbo 6s, it would be this system. And if you can get over the different soundtrack, I would say for most intents and purposes, this can also replace the Mercedes 4-liter twin-turbo V8. Now, I'm only human, so I'm still going to be shedding tears over the loss of that V8 soundtrack, but eventually I might get over it.